Hello everyone, tonight we are traveling back to a time of muddy fields, heavy cloaks, and absolutely no Wi-Fi. You've somehow woken up in the Middle Ages. Don't panic, you'll adjust. The room you're in smells faintly of damp straw, wood smoke, and possibly goat. A single candle flickers in the corner, casting jittery shadows across rough stone walls. There's a draft. Always a draft. Your bed, if we can call it that, is a burlap sack stuffed with straw and some ancient lumps that may or may not be last year's potatoes. Your clothes are coarse and scratchy, your feet are bare, and your pillow is... oh, there is no pillow. Welcome to the past. And no, you're not dreaming. You sit up slowly, your spine popping like firewood. The floor is cold. A rooster crows outside your first medieval alarm clock. You blink a few times. This is not a reenactment. This is your life now. And I hate to break it to you, but you probably won't survive more than a week unless you get real comfortable with mud hunger and superstition. But hey, on the bright side, no email. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it where you are? Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. The candle sputters as you step cautiously toward the tiny wooden door of your hut. It's still dark outside, but there's a glow on the horizon, a kind of smoky pink you've only ever seen in oil paintings. The village is silent except for the occasional lowing of a cow and the soft gurgle of a nearby stream. You shiver. The air is crisp, the ground damp, and your breath mists faintly in front of you. You realize slowly that you don't know where or when you are. You live apparently in a thatched roof cottage with walls made of wattle and daub. There's no lock on the door, no glass in the windows, and definitely no thermostat. Your neighbors are chickens, literally. One is pecking at your foot. Inside, a small fire smolders in the hearth. Smoke curls lazily into the rafters, darkening the ceiling beams. There's a wooden bench, a battered table, and a few clay bowls stacked like ancient Tupperware. Someone stirs under a rough woolen blanket, your medieval housemaid, maybe your spouse. You're not entirely sure. It's hard to tell when they're wrapped like a turnip. Suddenly there's movement outside. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9, runs past the open doorway chasing a goose. He's barefoot, giggling, and absolutely filthy. You step outside to get a better look. The village is coming to life. A woman 2 huts down is pouring water into a wooden bucket. Her hair is braided, her face pale and serious. An old man sharpens a scythe, using a whetstone that has clearly seen better days. In the distance, a bell tolls deep and slow, the kind that vibrates in your bones. It's not a church bell, but the monastery's. It signals the start of the day, a sound that will become the heartbeat of your new life. There are no clocks here, just sun shadow and bells. A dog trots past you, 3 legs, 1 eye, and the confidence of a king. You follow him to the edge of the village where the land opens into fields. Rows of tilled earth stretch out like a ribbed corduroy, damp and dark and waiting. A young man, perhaps your neighbor, is already knee-deep in mud, urging an ox to pull a wooden plow. He's shouting in a language you half recognize. It's English, sort of. But not your English. You learn quickly. You have no choice. Your new name apparently is Edric. Your job farming. All day, every day, rain or shine. You own nothing, not the land, not the house, not even the ox. Everything belongs to the Lord in the manor, including a portion of anything you grow. In return, he offers protection, though from what you're not entirely sure yet, hopefully not dragons. There aren't dragons, probably. As you stand in the mud, watching the plow slice through the soil, a raven lands on the fence beside you and caws once dramatically. You're not sure if it's a bad omen or just a hungry bird. Either way, it stares too long and you stare back, trying to look tougher than you feel. By mid-morning, your hands are blistered, your legs ache, and your stomach is rumbling. Medieval workdays begin at dawn and last until the sky fades. There are breaks, but they're few and always filled with more chores. Fetching water, feeding livestock, repairing fences, scrubbing the muck off tools that haven't been cleaned since the Normans invaded. Oddly enough, the people are kind, weathered and quiet, but kind. They speak with thick accents, drop words you don't know, and laugh when you misunderstand something, like when you tried to pet the god goose. It bit you. You now have a scar and a grudge. You're invited to a midday meal in someone's hut. It's a bowl of something grey. Could be soup, could be porridge, could be experimental. Either way, it's warm and you're grateful. You eat with your hands and try not to look too modern. Someone offers you a joke about the bishop's baldness and everyone chuckles. By late afternoon, you're back in the field. The ox is less cooperative now, or maybe you're slower. Your arms feel like they've been replaced by wet rope. The sun is lower now, orange and gold slanting across the fields. A child hands you a piece of hard cheese and a crust of bread. No butter, no jam. But it's the best thing you've tasted in days. As you sit on a stump, chewing and watching the smoke rise from the village chimneys, you finally admit to yourself you're not dreaming. Not. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd whistles and a dog barks in reply. A woman sings a lullaby and someone else laughs so hard they wheeze. It's not the life you know, but it is somehow life. And then, as the sun kisses the edge of the hills and the chill sets in again, the bell rings once more. It's time for evening prayers, or maybe supper, or both. You don't care. You're so starving and you smell like goat. But when you look at the darkening sky pierced by one cold perfect star, it doesn't feel quite so strange. The smell hits you first. It's sour, smoky, earthy, and uncomfortably familiar. Breakfast in the medieval world is not exactly a 5-star affair. You squint in the dim morning light of your cottage as someone stirs the fire, revealing a pot suspended above the embers. Whatever is in it has the consistency of wet wallpaper paste and the color of regret. Pottage says a voice you now recognize as belonging to your wife, or partner, or someone you apparently live with. You nod like this is normal. The meal is served without ceremony. A wooden bowl filled with barley porridge, a heel of rock-hard bread that could double as a building material, and a wooden cup of what she calls ale, but you're pretty sure is the medieval equivalent of flat la croix with a hint of bread crust. You eat in silence, your teeth working hard to get through the bread, which may be older than the Crusades. But strangely, it warms you, not just physically, but emotionally. There's something comforting about the ritual, the sharing, the fact that this is survival. And it's enough. Outside the village is alive. Chickens flap past your door, goats bleat with the kind of intensity that suggests drama. A child screams, but the kind of scream that suggests chasing a pig rather than, say, a Viking raid. Small victories. You've learned that today is market day, which sounds exciting until you realize it means you'll be hauling a cart of turnips to a muddy field where people argue over eggs for 6 hours. But first the fields. You walk barefoot along the narrow track that leads to the strip fields beyond the village. The mud is ankle deep in places, and there is no such thing as socks. Your tunic sticks to your back with the kind of damp chill that suggests it will never be truly dry again, and yet somehow you don't hate it. In the fields, the work begins. You till, you sow, you carry. You chase a pig that got loose and led 3 children on a full-scale farce through a barley patch. You learned the names of plants you didn't know existed word spelled, and something affectionately known as poor man's cabbage, which tastes like disappointment. The ox today is unusually feisty. You name him Gerald for some reason, and attempt to communicate telepathically. Gerald does not respond. Mid-morning, the village bell tolls again, its tone deeper, this time slower. It's not a call to arms. It's a call to rest. Briefly. You sit under a tree with another farmer whose name might be Alric or maybe Alwyn. He offers you a boiled onion wrapped in a leaf. You accept because saying no might result in social exile or worse, more turnip hauling. Between mouthfuls of sulphurous onion, Alric Alwyn tells you about last winter. The frost came early. They lost a third of the barley. One cow just froze solid standing up, but then miraculously it snowed during the feast of Saint Cuthbert, and some say that's why the mice didn't eat the grain that year. A miracle, he says, solemnly spitting into the dirt. You nod. You've heard stranger things today. You learn that medieval time isn't kept in hours, but in bells, in tasks, in sun angles, and stomach growls. No one has a watch. Time is a rhythm, not a measurement. By early afternoon, your back feels like it's made of glass and string. The sun beats down with the casual cruelty of late spring. You remove your cloak, which is mostly damp wool, and ambition, and keep going. You pass the village priest walking slowly along the path, muttering Latin under his breath and swatting at flies. He's wearing shoes, which is rare. He gives you a nod, and you nod back, suddenly feeling like a character in a video game side quest. Back in the village, the market begins to assemble. It's not the bustling bazaar of movies. It's more like a muddy yard sale with produce and a faint smell of manure. A man is selling what he claims is salt, but looks suspiciously like sand. Another offers smoked fish from a nearby river. They are, in a word, optimistic. You place your turnips on a board and wait. A woman with more missing teeth than you thought possible inspects your produce with the scrutiny of a royal treasurer. She haggles over half a cabbage. You win, barely. Payment is a handful of eggs and something she calls soap, which may or may not just be lard with herbs. As you make your way home carrying your treasures in a woven basket that's definitely older than the roof over your bed, you pass the manor house. It looms at the edge of the village, all stone and wood, with a carved wooden door and a chimney that puffs actual clean smoke. A guard in a patched-up helmet watches you go by. You nod. He doesn't nod back. This is your lord's house. You've never been inside, but you know it by heart. That's where the taxes go. That's where the decisions are made. That's where your future, however humble, is quietly decided. Dinner is simple. Again. Turnips again. But tonight they're mashed, so technically variety. As the sun dips low, children chase each other in the square. A dog steals a chicken leg and is pursued by 3 angry toddlers. Someone begins to sing an old song about a knight who got drunk and married a goose. You don't understand the words, but the tune is oddly moving. Inside you lie down on the straw bed, your soul filthy and exhausted, but it's a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from doing everything with your own 2 hands and knowing no one expects a thing beyond that. You think about your old life traffic deadlines, passwords, and feel a strange detachment, like remembering a dream that's already fading. The candle burns low. The fire crackles. Somewhere nearby, someone snores like a dragon with sinus problems. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel safe. Odd historical fact. People in the Middle Ages drank weak ale instead of water because it was safer. Historians still debate whether the average medieval diet was healthier than ours today, despite the lack of variety. Spoiler, no one ate kale chips. And tomorrow is more of the same. The same mud, same goats, same bread that could shatter glass. But also the same sky, the same stars, the same ancient rhythm of a world turning slowly quietly toward something you can't name. The next morning begins not with the sunrise, but with sound. First the rooster again screaming like it's been personally betrayed by the sun. Then the church bell tolling low and slow like a tired old man mumbling his way into Monday. You sit up already sore, already behind, the fire is out, the porridge is cold, and your tunic still smells like last week's goat. Nothing new. But today you're not heading straight to the fields. Today is Tithe Day. You're reminded of this by the arrival of Brother Oswin, The village priest, who walks down the muddy path with the dignity of a man whose boots don't match and who might have used candle wax as hair gel. He carries a ledger the size of a small sheep and wears a stern expression that says, "You are definitely 3 eggs short of righteousness. Tithing means giving 1/10 of your produce to the church, not to God technically, to Oswin. You suspect God sees none of the chickens." As you watch your neighbor reluctantly hand over a sack of barley a hen, and something in a wrapped cloth that clucks once and then never again, you feel the weight of medieval generosity. Your own contribution is humble. Some garlic bulbs, 2 onions, and a coin you found near the stream that may or may not be Roman. Oswin nods gravely and records it with a charcoal stub. He mutters a blessing, but it's so fast and mumbled that you're fairly certain he just said something about turnips and eternal damnation. Afterward, you trail behind the procession heading to morning mass. The church is small stone walls, thatched roof, wooden benches. It smells like wax and old wet coats. At the altar, Oswin recites the Latin phrases with a cadence that's both soothing and mildly threatening. No one understands most of the words, including Oswin, but everyone nods solemnly anyway. You kneel on the cold stone floor, your knees aching your stomach, already wondering if there's second breakfast in this era. There isn't. As incense curls through the air, you try to focus, but your eyes drift to the stained glass window. Tiny shards of colored light making halos on the backs of bowed heads. A rooster crows again. Somewhere a baby cries. You're reminded that even holiness has background noise. After Mass, you join a group gathering by the well. It's gossip hour, thinly disguised as water fetching. You learn that the cooper's wife saw a fox in the churchyard, which could mean a bad harvest or just a fox. You also hear that old Walter, who once tried to court the miller's daughter with a dead eel, has mysteriously gone blind in one eye. No one is surprised. Someone mentions a cunning woman from the next village who sells remedies for lovesickness and foot rot. Apparently, she was recently accused of witchcraft, which in this context might mean anything from she healed someone to her soup was weird. Faith and fear live very close together in this village. You begin to notice how much the church controls, not just salvation, but time-space thought. Feast days dictate rest. Saints determine when to plant. Confession decides who you trust and who you don't. Back in the fields, your fellow peasants plow and sow with a quiet diligence that borders on spiritual. Each step, each swing of the scythe feels like a prayer, not necessarily a joyful one, but still something whispered to the earth in exchange for survival. Around noon, you overhear a debate between 2 men about whether a solar eclipse is a sign of God's displeasure or just the sun getting eaten by a sky dragon. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers genuinely believed such things or just said them to scare children. Later, you're invited to the house of Wolfhild, the baker's sister, for a rare treat bread fresh from the oven, still warm, still soft. You tear it with your hands, dipping it in a bit of honey saved for special days. It is without exaggeration the single best bite of food you've had since waking up in this timeline, and possibly in your entire modern life. After the meal, someone starts telling a story. It's about a knight who was cursed for failing to give alms. He wandered the woods for 7 years, turned into a wild man with antlers, and only became human again after donating his last coin to a monastery. The moral is unclear, but the performance is compelling. There's a part with dramatic goat noises that earns raucous laughter. Storytelling is how information travels here. No books, no pamphlets, no top 10 mistakes you're making in medieval farming videos. Just word of mouth, exaggerated, twisted, polished, like a smooth stone passed down through generations. You realize these stories are more than entertainment. They're structure, they're code, they're what tell you who you are. As dusk creeps in, the air smells like turned soil and chimney smoke. You return to your hut with aching arms and half a carrot someone paid you for with a wink and a riddle. Your wife, still unnamed, still unbothered, greets you with a nod and a pot of stew so thin it might qualify as tea. You eat together side by side as the light fades, and then you hear it. A scream in the distance. Not a pig, not a goat, human. You and several others run toward the sound. A young boy has fallen into the well. The village erupts in panic. Buckets, ropes, shouting. You join in instinctively without thought. By some miracle, they pull him out. Soaked, coughing, pale but alive. Everyone cheers. The boy's mother weeps into her apron. Brother Oswin appears, makes the sign of the cross, and declares the child was saved by the intercession of Saint Ethelburga. Someone mutters that it was more likely the strong arms of Alric Alwyn. Faith and physics both get credit here. Later by the fire, you replay the moment in your mind. How quickly people responded, how no one asked for thanks, how everyone, even the dog, played a part. It dawns on you, community is not a bonus feature of medieval life, it's the operating system. You sit quietly as the fire crackles low. The moon glows through the open shutter. Somewhere a lute is being played badly, but earnestly. You close your eyes and let the music drift over you like fog. Strange fact, people believed that sneezing expelled evil spirits, which is why God bless you became standard. And yes, they were right to be worried cold could kill. As sleep claims, you once again curled under a cloak that still smells faintly of Gerald the Ox. You feel oddly settled. It's not a world of comfort. But it is a world of meaning. You wake to snow. Not the clean, fluffy snow of modern Instagram winters, but the heavy, wet kind that seeps into your bones and makes everything smell like wet dog and moldy wood. Your thatched roof leaks in 2 places, and a small puddle has formed beside your straw mattress. You name it Lake Regret. Winter in the Middle Ages isn't just a season, it's an ordeal. Breakfast is stale bread, toasted slightly over the fire and dipped in ale that froze a little overnight. Your wife, who still hasn't offered a name but calls you husband, with both affection and subtle judgment, wraps the children in layers of wool and linen and sends them out to break the ice in the troughs. The goats are unimpressed. Gerald the Ox has developed what appears to be an attitude problem. You step outside and are hit by a wall of wind that smells like smoke and desperation. Your hands, even gloved, feel brittle. You carry a basket of firewood to the neighbor's cottage, old Meg, who lost her toes to frostbite 2 winters ago. She thanks you by spitting into a handkerchief and pressing it to your cheek. You assume it's a blessing or a curse. It's hard to tell. Everything in winter is harder. The mud is now frozen and sharp. Your boots crack. Your breath fogs like you're auditioning for a dragon role. But still, life grinds on. Work in the fields is limited to repairs and animal care. Instead, your days now revolve around mending tools, weaving baskets, chopping wood, and trying not to freeze to death in your sleep. But the cold brings with it one unexpected gift: time to talk. At night, the village gathers in clusters around hearths. You cram into Wolfhill, the baker's cottage, where the air is thick with smoke, laughter, and the scent of slightly burned onions. Tonight there's music of a sort. A young man plays a bone flute with more enthusiasm than talent, while an old woman keeps rhythm by slapping her thighs. And then the stories begin. There's one about a farmer who fell in love with a selkie, another about a knight who was turned into a frog and tricked a king into marrying his daughter. The tales are strange, meandering, full of moral ambiguity and unexpected flatulence. You laugh until your sides ache. A moment later the mood shifts. Someone whispers the tale of the black dog, a spirit said to stalk the moors and devour the souls of the wicked. A young girl clutches her blanket tighter. Someone throws salt into the fire. You follow suit. The line between superstition and survival here is very, very thin. You notice how easily fear moves through the room. Not panic exactly. More like a shared agreement that the world is full of things that want to kill you, and that the only defense is story, ritual, and each other. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, someone sings an old hymn, their voice shaking but sincere. And then there's a knock at the door. Everyone freezes. You feel the collective breath hold. The door creaks open. It's just Brother Oswin Hood, dusted with snow, asking if anyone has spare turnips for the sick. You release your breath. He's offered a bowl of stew and stays to tell a rather scandalous story about St. Wilbur and a goose that refused to be cooked. Historians still debate whether this miracle was symbolic or simply goose-related obstinacy. The days crawl by like frozen snails. One morning, the miller's wife births twins. The next, a cow collapses and dies in the cold. Life and death, joy and loss stacked like logs by the hearth. On the coldest day of the year, the village celebrates Candlemas. It's a festival of fire and faith, where every household lights a candle and parades through the village to bless the fields, the animals, and the people. You hold a stubby candle with trembling fingers, your breath puffing like steam as the procession winds past the church, the manor, and the boundary stones. Children wear wreaths of evergreen, adults hum songs older than memory. You pass the graveyard and people throw bits of bread to the souls of the departed. Someone tells you not to look directly at the shadows. You don't ask why. That night in your hut you dream of fire, not destructive, more like a warm wave, a hearth that stretches forever. You wake with your face nestled in straw, the faint scent of rosemary in the air. Someone must have slipped a sprig under your pillow, for luck. Winter isn't just hard here, it's mystical. It strips life down to the essentials: warmth, food, faith, and story. Weird fact, people used to believe that cats could steal your breath while you slept. No one seems to own a cat here. Coincidence? You decide not to test it. One night, a traveling peddler arrives. He carries pots, knives, and a bundle of colored ribbons. His clothes are layered and patched, and his eyes gleam with secrets. He tells tales from distant villages, of a place where bread grows on trees, of a man who talks to bees and they obey, of a noblewoman who left her husband and became a pirate. You buy nothing, but you give him a place by the fire. And as he sleeps, boots still on snoring like a tiny windmill, you realize he is freedom. He has no lord, no land, no tithe, but also no home. You think about that as the fire dies low, as you pull the blanket over your shoulders and hear the wind moan through the chimney like a ghost who never learned lyrics. Winter in medieval times is not cozy, but it is real, raw, beautiful in its own cracked way. And tomorrow the ice may break, the sun may show its face, you might find an egg in the coop, or hear the first bird brave enough to sing in the frost. Or maybe nothing will change at all, but you'll wake and live, and that in this time is a miracle. Spring arrives not with a trumpet blast, but a slow exhale. One morning, the frost just doesn't return. The air is still cold, but the ground is soft, and the birds, those glorious fools, begin singing like they've been rehearsing all winter. You open the creaky door to your cottage and smell mud, manure, and wet bark. But underneath, it all green. Life is crawling back in. The village begins to stir differently now. People move faster, lighter, as if they've survived something. And they have. Children chase chickens with renewed confidence. Women hang linens in the wind, which still carries a bite, but also something sweet. Somewhere between the pig pen and the well, someone finds a snowdrop blooming. It's treated like a holy relic. But as the earth thaws, so too does memory. And today, your neighbor Ulrich Ulwin, the one with the mysterious boiled onions, tells you the story of William. Not William your Thatcher. Not William the goat thief. Know that William. The one who went from peasant to king. He starts the story in the fields with a barefoot boy running between furrows, chasing butterflies, and pretending his stick is a sword. You've seen a dozen like him, muddy, loud, full of nonsense. But this boy says Alric Alwyn was different. He watched, he listened, he learned. William was orphaned young, but somehow ended up in the household of a local lord, not as a servant, but as a squire. An unthinkable leap for a peasant child. He was taught to ride, to fight, to speak like someone who expected to be obeyed. And he didn't just survive court life, he thrived. Swordsmanship came easy. So did diplomacy and, oddly, flattery. Alric Alwyn leans in conspiratorially and whispers the boy could charm a nun into starting a war. Eventually, William caught the eye of the Duke of Normandy, a man not known for sentiment. But he saw in William a fire, a hunger. He knighted him, gave him lands, titles, a real seat at the table. Not bad for someone who once couldn't afford boots. You sit in the shade of a budding tree, mouth open, barley porridge forgotten. Didn't he become king, you ask? Alric Alwyn nods slowly. Aye. But not before starting a war. Because William didn't just want land or favour, he wanted England. And in 1066, when the English king died without an heir, William claimed the crown as his birthright. There were others who wanted it too. Namely Harold Godwinson, a name that sounds like someone who'd argue about cheese prices at market. But Harold was no fool. He rallied an army. William crossed the English Channel with thousands of men and horses, armor banners, supplies all crammed into ships that looked like enormous wooden bathtubs with sails. They landed on the southern coast and waited. And then Hastings. The Battle of Hastings was long, bloody, and so legendary that someone eventually stitched it into a giant tapestry. Seriously, it's still around. Google it when you get back to your century. The English fought in a tight shield wall, a literal wall of bodies and blades. The Normans couldn't break it. So William did something brilliant. He faked a retreat. His cavalry turned and ran, pretending to flee. The English gave chase finally a chance to wipe them out. But when they broke ranks, William's men wheeled around and smashed into them from both sides. Chaos. By day's end, Harold was dead. Arrow to the eye, legend says. Maybe true, maybe poetic. Historians still debate whether it really happened or if it's just the medieval version of cinematic flair. But the result was clear: William won. And on Christmas Day 1066, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, a peasant's son now wearing a crown. The nobles were forced to kneel. The old guard was swept out. French became the language of court, and the English aristocracy was turned inside out. You sit there stunned. The wind plays with the hem of your cloak. In a world where nothing changes, where your future seems as fixed as the stars here, was proof it wasn't always so. Could I do that, you ask, half joking? Alric Alwyn laughs so hard he nearly chokes on a piece of turnip. No, he says, wiping his eyes. But it's fun to dream. Later that night, you lie on your straw mattress, eyes wide in the dark, thinking about William. About how the world must have looked to him one giant game of chess if the pieces bled and the board was made of mud. You wonder what gave him the gall to even try. Ambition, destiny, or just a refusal to accept that muddy boots were all he'd ever have. Odd historical fact, William's invasion was so well documented that we know what type of bread his soldiers ate. It was rye, dry, and they had to soak it in ale so they didn't break teeth. Some things never change, and as your body begins to drift into sleep, the story's still turning in your mind, like a prayer wheel. You start to wonder how many other Williams never got noticed. How many barefoot boys stayed barefoot despite all that fire in their hearts? But this one did. He broke the wheel. And tomorrow when you wake, the fields will still be there. The goats will still bleat. Gerald will still not listen, but you'll plow a little straighter. Because somewhere in this muddy, stubborn world, a boy once rose, and the soil remembers. The castle appears on the horizon like a stone mirage, first a speck on the ridge, then a hulking silhouette against the sky, And finally, as you trudge closer, an overwhelming mass of towers, battlements, and pride. It's not your castle, of course. It never will be. But today you're hauling grain up to its gatehouse, and for the first time you see how the other half lives, or how they hide. The drawbridge creaks under your feet as you cross a moat that smells like a frog's bad decisions. Beneath the castle shadow, everything feels quieter. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that comes from too many ears listening. Guards nod at you just barely. You nod back, trying not to step on anything too clean. Inside, the bailey, the castle's outer courtyard, chaos reigns, but in a very organized, expensive kind of way. Blacksmiths hammer out horseshoes, boys in tunics run errands dodging chickens and nobles alike. They're shouting, snorting, barking. A scullery maid trips over a bucket and swears in 3 languages. You feel utterly underdressed. Your grain is delivered to the storeroom without ceremony. Payment comes in the form of a wooden token to be redeemed at the next manor tithe. It smells faintly of wax and disappointment. You tuck it into your belt, and then you linger. You shouldn't, but you do. Because this castle, it pulls at you. Not just because of its scale or the way the banners flap like arrogant butterflies, but because you realize something. This is where power lives. Not in gold or in bread or in Latin prayers. In walls, thick, high, unyielding. You drift toward the inner keep, pretending to admire the stonework. A young knight brushes past you, chainmail jingling like aggressive wind chimes. He doesn't look at you, but a kitchen boy does and offers you a smirk. You smirk back, allies in anonymity. Historians still debate whether early Norman castles were more about defense or domination. After standing in one, you're convinced both. Originally, these fortresses were made of wood, quick to build, easy to burn. But now, stone. So much stone. Grey and weather-stained, it rises in layers, curtain walls, turrets, and a keep that looks like it was carved by giants. They call it motte and bailey, named for the motte or mound and the bailey or courtyard, but that doesn't capture the sheer presence of it. This place isn't just a home. It's a statement. We're here now. And we're not leaving. As you wander the bailey casually, but not too casually, you catch glimpses of courtly life. A lady with a jeweled veil is scolding a page for dropping her embroidery in the mud. A bearded lord haggles with a falconer over the cost of a bird that looks like it wants nothing to do with humans. A group of squires practice sword play with dulled blades, their breath misting in the morning air. One of them winces as he's hit in the leg. No one comforts him. Then you hear music, not the crude, joyous kind from the village. This is plucked on a lute soft and practiced. You follow the sound to a side chamber where a minstrel sings of lost love and distant wars. The lyrics are mostly nonsense, something about a fish and a lady named Isolde, but the tone is heartbreakingly sweet. No one claps. They just nod as if music is something to be endured politely. Life in the castle is curated. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a place, including you outside. You're reminded of a phrase someone whispered once during a village feast. Castles are built for those who fear their neighbors. You didn't understand it then. Now you do. But even fear has a kitchen. And so naturally that's where you end up helping an overworked cook chop onions for the noon meal. The kitchen is a hive of heat, shouting, and flying elbows. Cauldrons bubble, bread bakes. A small child is peeling turnips with the efficiency of someone who's definitely been reincarnated. For your help, you're offered stew. Real stew. With meat. You almost cry. While eating, you learn that castle kitchens feed hundreds every day, nobles, squires, servants, guards, random peasants like yourself who showed up with grain and didn't leave. The cook Matilda tells you with a wink that she once poisoned a duck to get out of cooking for a visiting baron. He was allergic, she says, or just dramatic. Odd historical fact. Medieval castle kitchens often had their own brewhouses and bakeries. Some even had ice houses to store perishables, basically early refrigerators for the very rich. You silently mourn every lukewarm turnip you've ever eaten. After lunch, you sneak out to the training yard where knights practice jousting. Horses gallop, lances shatter, and grown men yell things like, "Have at thee," without irony. You're tempted to clap, but it doesn't feel like the kind of place where applause is welcome unless you own a sword. One knight in particular catches your eye. He's older than the others, but every movement is deliberate, clean, efficient. He doesn't waste energy. You watch him knock a much younger opponent flat with a single pivot of his shield. Then he walks away like it was nothing. That you realize is power, not in noise, in control. Back near the gate, you pass the chapel, a simple stone building with stained glass the color of bruises. Inside, a priest prays alone, his word echoing off empty pews. You don't interrupt. Instead, you sit on the steps outside watching as dusk paints the walls golden. You think about William again. How he must have felt when he first stood in a castle like this, not as a visitor, but as a ruler. Did it make him feel safe or small? Historians argue about when castles stopped being just fortresses and started becoming symbols. You think it was always both. A castle is a crown you can walk into, a throne made of stone. As the bell tolls evening, you make your way down the hill toward the village. Smoke curls from chimneys, cows moo like they've been waiting all day to complain. You smile, your feet hurt. You're carrying a loaf of real bread from Matilda wrapped in cloth. A gift. That night, as you chew your way through a slice of that bread, dense, chewy, and faintly sweet, you lie back on your mattress and picture the castle. Not the lords or the walls, but the flickering torches. The rhythm of hooves in the courtyard, the hush in the chapel, the way the air changed when you stepped through its gate. You may never live there. But now, in some small way, it lives in you. By now, you've learned that castles may be made of stone, but chivalry is made of very creative marketing. It's the next morning, and you're back at the manor, this time helping clear brush near the tilt yard, the open space where knights practice their not-so-gentle art of dramatic violence. The local lord is preparing for a small tournament. Not a big one, mind you, no flower crowns or dragons or CGI, but still a formal event where armor gets dented, egos bruised, and someone usually sprains something in front of a lady. You're handed a rake and pointed at the edge of the field, but instead of working, you watch. The knights arrive first. They trot in on heavy horses with names like Thunder or Valor, draped in cloth of gold and armored up to the eyebrows. They shine in the morning sun like overly decorated teapots. Their squires follow close behind lads barely 14, dragging gear, shouting "yes, sirs," and carrying water like their lives depend on it. Which, fun fact, they kind of do. These men are knights members of a warrior class, supposedly bound by honor, loyalty, and a deep love of uncomfortable clothing. They're the idols of every child in the village and the butt of every joke behind castle walls. One trips over his stirrup and face plants into a bale of hay. No one helps him up. The tournament is a subdued affair. No jousting today, just the melee. Two teams of armored men try to knock each other around with blunted swords, and an enthusiasm usually reserved for bar fights. You duck as a helmet goes sailing past your head. To be clear, it looks fun, but also like a very painful way to impress someone who probably already thinks you smell like goat. You hear someone behind you scoff. "They're playing," says a voice dry as summer straw. You want real chivalry? Try holding a fortress in winter with no grain and a bishop demanding taxes. You turn to see a woman in a deep red cloak. Her hair is bound in braids, her eyes sharp. Lady Isel, someone whispers nearby. The Lord's sister. She watches the melee without blinking. Chivalry, she says, as if the word itself is a bad joke. A code written by men who never followed it. She's not wrong. You've already noticed the gap between myth and mud here. Knights are supposed to be noble defenders of the weak, but many are just hard muscle in fancy clothes. One supposedly rescued a merchant's daughter last month, rescued in this case meaning kidnapped and ransomed her back to her father for a new cloak and a donkey. Historians still debate how seriously chivalry was taken. Some saw it as a genuine attempt to instill honor in a brutal world. Others say it was just PR for the murdery class. As the melee ends in a flurry of groaning and one impressive nosebleed, the heralds declare a victor. A younger knight named Sir Tybalt bows low to the assembled crowd and tosses a flower to a giggling girl in a blue gown. She catches it, blushes, and promptly sneezes. Romance. Afterward, a feast is held in the castle's great hall. You're not invited, obviously, but you end up helping in the kitchens again. It's chaos. Boiling pots, roasted birds, pies the size of shields. A dog runs by with an entire sausage link in its mouth. You cheer for it quietly. Later, when the food is gone and the nobles are drunk on spiced wine and self-importance, music begins. A minstrel plays something delicate on a harp while a jester in a motley coat juggles apples and quotes Latin badly. One of the knights is dancing badly with a noblewoman who appears to be twice his age and 4 times his political rank. You sneak into the back of the hall to observe. It's dazzling candles everywhere, tapestries fluttering in the draught, laughter echoing off stone. But even here you can sense the cracks, the whispers. A steward complaining about the cost of new armor. A lady sighing that her cousin's lands were seized after a failed hunt. A priest muttering that Sir Tybalt has confessed to far too many sins, far too casually. Outside this glittering space, people freeze and starve. Inside, they toast each other with silver goblets and argue about poetry. It's beautiful and ridiculous. As the feast ends, Lady Isolde passes you again. "Did you enjoy the show?" she asks. You blink. She's talking to you. "I like the dog," you say. She smirks. "He's smarter than half the men in this room, and probably smells better." She walks away, trailing silk and mystery. You wonder if she's the kind of person who poisons wine for sport or just writes epic poems in secret. The next day, you're back in the village. The tournament is over. The fields are wet again. Gerald is in a mood. But something shifted. You look at the world differently now. You've seen the pageantry, the rituals, the fragile elegance of power up close, and you've seen how thin the line is between nobility and nonsense. Weird fact, knights didn't always wear full plate armor. Chainmail was more common for centuries, and it weighed about 30 pounds, roughly the weight of a toddler, made of iron. As you sharpen your scythe and sip weak ale from a wooden cup that leaks slightly, you realize something oddly comforting. You don't need to be a knight to matter here. Honor isn't just steel and ceremony. Sometimes it's chopping wood for an old woman who calls you by the wrong name but always saves you the good onions. Sometimes it's helping a child pull a stuck goat from a fence while pretending to be a famous hero. You name yourself Sir Turnip. It sticks. And sometimes it's simply waking up again, doing the work, telling the story, and trying to live a little better than the day before. You don't wear armor, but your hands are calloused. Your back is strong. Your name might not be written in any book, but in this muddy, chaotic, candlelit world you exist. And that's enough. Summer settles over the village like a thick wool blanket that smells faintly of flowers and sweat. The days are long, the sun rises too early, and sleep becomes optional. You wake with the light already poking through the crooked shutters of your hut dust floating in golden beams, and your body reminding you through a symphony of aches and creaks that harvest season has begun. The first thing you notice is the sound. It's everywhere. Bees buzzing drunkenly from blossom to blossom. Birds arguing over berries in the hedgerows. Someone nearby hammering a cartwheel back into shape. Children chasing chickens and shouting things that might be rules or just enthusiastic nonsense. And over it all, the constant rustle of wind through ripened grain. You step outside and the scent hits you, sun-warmed earth, animal musk, smoke, and something green, fresh, alive, humming with growth. The fields are golden now, swollen with barley and wheat ready to be cut before the weather turns and decides to be cruel. You grab your sickle, which is only slightly sharper than a butter knife, and head toward your assigned plot. Today, you're cutting alongside Wolfield, who works twice as fast as you do and still manages to critique your grip, your posture, and the way your socks keep falling down. You swing like a nobleman, she says, which in this context is not a compliment. You try harder. The work is brutal. The sun rises higher and cooks your back through the rough linen of your tunic. Your hands blister, sweat pours down your spine, but the rhythm, cut, gather, tie, repeat, starts to carry you. It's not beautiful, but it's steady, and steady is life. Around midday, there's a break. You gather with the others beneath a small patch of shade, really just a bush, pretending to be a tree, and eat lunch, a hunk of dark bread and onions so strong it fights back, and a piece of dried fruit that might be an apricot or a very old mushroom. Someone shares a jug of small beer. It's warm and slightly sour, but better than water from the ditch. Conversation drifts lazily between topics: how the oxen have been moody, how the last batch of cheese molded too fast, how someone's cousin in the next village swears he saw a wolf that walked on two legs. Too much ale, says Alric Alwyn, who has his own flask and very little credibility. You nod along, half listening, half sleeping, with your eyes open. When the break ends, you return to the field, shoulders aching, but not complaining. Because you know what's at stake. If the grain doesn't come in before the next storm, or if the rats get to the storage first, or if the miller cheats again with his measuring stones, the winter ahead will be leaner than a fasting monk. The pressure sits heavy in the air, but no one speaks it aloud. Instead, they joke, they sing, they work with quiet determination and grim optimism. And then come the reapers, not the skeletal kind with scythes and poor bedside manner, but real human workers hired from neighboring villages. They arrive in a line, strong, silent, sun-browned men and women, carrying their own tools, their own rhythms. They work quickly, efficiently, professionally. You watch one of them tie a bundle of wheat so fast, it's like watching a magician finish a trick before you've even blinked. Wolfield calls them the storm. You don't argue. That evening, after the fields go quiet and the sun leans low against the edge of the world, the village prepares for Lammas, loaf mass, the first feast of harvest. It's not grand, but it is important. Brother Oswin blesses the first loaf baked from the new grain. He does it with solemnity, but you catch him sneaking a bite before the prayer's even over. The villagers pretend not to notice. There's food, roasted turnips, boiled eggs, flat cakes sweetened with honey if you're lucky, bits of dried apple if you're not. There's music, badly tuned, flutes, two tambourines that have seen better centuries, and an old man with a sheep's bladder drum that doubles as a pillow. People dance. Children shriek with joy. The fire crackles high into the night. You find yourself dancing again with Wolfield. You're slightly better this time. Slightly. She still steps on your foot on purpose just to remind you who's in charge. Someone tells a story about a fox who outwitted a king by dressing as a bishop. You're not sure if it's a joke, a fable, or a very specific insult directed at Brother Oswin. Either way, it gets a good laugh. Later, you lie in the grass beside the chapel, chewing a stalk of wheat and staring at the stars. The moon is full. The sky is deep and endless and very still. Someone nearby whispers that they think the harvest will be enough. Just enough. And that's all anyone ever wants. Not wealth, not splendor, just enough. You fall asleep on the ground and wake with dew in your hair and a bug in your ear. Summer continues. The days get hotter. You help repair a fence. You help chase off a fox. You help deliver a baby goat. Life keeps asking and you keep answering. In small ways, you feel yourself becoming part of the village. You know the rhythm of the bell, the way the cobbler hums when he works, the sound of Wolfield's laugh when she's truly surprised. You know where to find mint near the stream. You know which chickens steal from which garden. You even begin to understand the subtle art of medieval gossip. And just when the heat becomes too much, the first leaf turns yellow. A tiny flag, waving at the edge of the season. A reminder nothing stays, not even summer. Tea hat night, you sit beside the fire, Gerald the ox snoring nearby, and reflect. You've seen hunger and hard work. You've seen superstition and shared bread. You've heard laughter rise from throats that haven't tasted meat in weeks. And somehow the world keeps spinning. Odd fact, some medieval villages had official bed testers for nobles. Their job was to warm the bed and make sure it wasn't cursed. You briefly wonder how that job interview went. The fire crackles lower. Woolfield dozes with her head on a sack of flour. The dog has taken your seat. The stars twinkle above you, ancient and indifferent. And you, tired, dirty content, feel like you belong here. Just for tonight. Just in this breath. And that is everything. The first you hear of it is a whisper in the chapel during evening candlelighting. A trader, soaked from travel and smelling like old wine, mentions it between coughs. Thousands of men are heading east. Some on foot, some on horseback, some barefoot and starving. They say they're going to take back the Holy Land. They say God wills it. The villagers hush him, but the word lingers crusade. At first it feels distant, a story carried on the wind, like tales of dragons or sea monsters. But the idea doesn't fade. It spreads. The priest preaches of it. Travelers bring more news. Lists of noblemen raising armies of commoners, building wagons of boys abandoning plows for swords. Soon enough, someone from your village goes. A baker's cousin, then a carpenter, then a shepherd who has never left the valley but claims he heard God in a dream. Each departure is marked with prayers and pride. The chapel bells ring not in mourning, but in awe. They are leaving for salvation, people say. For glory, for heaven, you are not sure. You ask Woolfield what she thinks. She shrugs while shaping dough. God's never asked me to travel 300 miles without socks, she mutters. You take that as a no. But the pressure builds. The lord of the manor receives word he is expected to send men provisions and coin. Those who cannot go must support those who do. Taxes rise, harvest shares increase, bread becomes thinner, ale weaker. Even those who stay feel the crusades pull its weight, pressing down like a second winter. Odd fact, some peasants did go willingly, believing that fighting in the crusades would cleanse their sins and elevate their status. Others were conscripted or lured by false promises. Few returned. One morning, a young man from the next village stops in your square. He's dressed in armor made of stitched leather and bits of chainmail. His shield is painted with a crude cross. He's missing 3 fingers on one hand. He doesn't speak much. Just asks for bread. You give him a loaf. He takes it with shaking hands and says, "Don't follow them." You never learn his name. As spring turns to summer, the stories grow darker. Armies that once marched in triumph now crawl in sickness, heat, starvation, betrayal. Some say entire villages have vanished, that noblemen burn cities to the ground if they refuse aid, that children have died in deserts without ever seeing Jerusalem. Historians still debate how much truth lies in the early tales of the Crusades, whether the atrocities were as widespread as the records suggest, or if they were exaggerated by survivors desperate to make sense of the chaos. But those who lived through it rarely argued. They knew pain when they heard it described. You begin to notice other changes too. Foreign coins show up in market stalls, spices with names you can't pronounce, stories of cities with domes that gleam like fire. A traveler speaks of paper that doesn't tear easily, of medicine brewed from crushed beetles and dried orange blossoms. Another claims to have seen a library with 1,000 books. For all the death and violence the Crusades bring, they also open doorways. Ideas travel. Language shifts, recipes change, the world once as small as your field and the church tower begins to stretch. And yet at home the cost grows. You help bury a neighbor who died of hunger during the third summer of drought and tax. You see Wolfhild go without meat for weeks so the children at the school can eat. You hear an old woman weep when her son's letter arrives written by a stranger because he lost both eyes and cannot write it himself. Despite this, the village endures. You plant, you teach, you mend. You refuse to let the world's distant wars extinguish the tiny flame you've kindled here, and others begin to do the same. One boy starts painting again little scenes of Homer goat with a crooked horn, Wolfhild baking your chapel in winter. His art finds its way to the neighboring town, then further still. One piece even ends up in the hands of a passing nobleman who pays for it with enough coin to feed your school for a month. You hear that the nobleman is raising funds for a different kind of crusade, not one of blood, but of learning. He seeks to gather books, scholars, translators. The crusade of the mind, someone calls it. You like the sound of that. One day a dusty monk arrives with a satchel full of scrolls. He stays, the knight reads aloud from a medical text he translated from Arabic. It speaks of the human body as a system of balanced humors and organs, not demons and curses. He gives you a copy before leaving. This knowledge came back with the soldiers, he says. Let's try not to lose it again. Wolfhild reads it with a furrowed brow. I always said onions were better than holy water. Not everything that returns from the Crusades is violence. Some things are seeds, seeds of questioning, of knowledge, of change. But still at night, you lie awake and wonder about the cost. The boys who never came home, the mothers who wait beside cold hearths, the way glory can twist into grief. You wonder what God makes of it all. You begin teaching your students not just how to read and write, but how to ask. Why do wars start? Who decides who must fight? Why do we trust stories written by victors? Some parents frown, others nod. But the questions keep coming. And in those questions, you find your own kind of crusade. One without swords, one with ink and bread and listening. And every night when the wind howls across the field, when the moon casts long shadows over the chapel's roof, you whisper a name you'll never forget, the boy with the broken shield and the shaking hands. You never followed him, but you remember, and that too is holy. It begins like any other summer, warm, golden, and humming with life. The fields stretch wide under a soft sky. The bees work the clover. Children splash in shallow streams. Wolfhild hums as she hangs linens, and you swear that for once the world feels like it might stay kind. Then the rats come. They appear quietly at first, a few in the granary, one scampering across the chapel's threshold. You think nothing of it. Vermin are part of village life like cracked boots and stubborn goats. But they multiply quickly. Too quickly. Their eyes glint red in the firelight. Their bodies slip through cracks like smoke. Some villagers set traps. Others curse. One boy claims he saw a rat chew through a wooden door. And then the sickness begins. At first it mimics a bad fever. Someone complains of heat, of aching limbs, of a pounding head. Then come the swellings under the arms, at the groin, behind the knees. Angry, dark, tender to the touch. Some burst, others harden like stone. People begin to cough black phlegm. Some vomit blood, others go blind. Few last more than a few days. You care for one of the first victims, a kind woman named Elricia, who used to braid the children's hair into flower crowns. She clutches your hand and begs you not to let her die alone. You don't. But you also can't save her. Her body is buried in haste. No ceremony. Just soil and silence. More follow. Within a week, the village is no longer bustling. It is whispering, doors shut tight. Children no longer play. No laughter, no music, no market songs. The chapel bell rings daily for the dead. At first you toll it yourself, then you stop counting. The plague has come. Weird fact. Though it's commonly called the Black Death, medieval Europeans had many names for the disease, the great pestilence, the great mortality, or simply the death. No one knew what caused it. Many believed it was punishment from God or poisoned air or even foreign magic. Historians still debate whether the plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century was bubonic, pneumonic, septicemic, or some brutal combination. But what no one debates is the devastation it left behind. 1/3 of Europe would die. In your village, the number climbs faster than anyone can comprehend. You and Wolfield isolate yourselves in the bakery, taking in only those who show no symptoms. You disinfect tools with vinegar. You boil everything. You stop hugging. You stop singing. You stop touching your own face. And still the fear creeps in. The village healer dies within the second week. The priest vanishes. Some say he fled. Others claim he went into the forest to fast and pray. Either way, he never returns. A group of villagers forms a quarantine zone, ropes tied between trees, guards posted with makeshift spears. They turn away anyone from other towns. A merchant begs to be let in, waving gold. No one opens the gate. He dies on the road. And yet, in the middle of all this, there is kindness. A teenage girl offers to care for her sick brother, even when everyone else avoids him. A man leaves baskets of food at doorsteps each dawn without taking credit. You catch Wolfhild sewing burial shrouds by moonlight, her lips moving in silent prayer. She claims it's just cloth, but you know it's more. Still, the numbers dwindle. One morning you walk to the market square. It is empty, utterly still. No footsteps, no chickens, no carts, just silence and the faint buzz of flies. A dog lies beside a body and won't move. You sit on a stone bench and weep. There is no shame in this. Even now, even here, emotion is a resistance. To cry is to admit the world mattered, that these lives were not just numbers, that every person lost had a name, a laugh, a favorite season, a secret song. You write them down in your journal. Every name you can remember, every memory you can salvage. You don't want them to disappear. And then just as suddenly as it began, it stops. Not all at once. There's no announcement, no fanfare. But a day passes with no new deaths. Then 2, then 5. The air seems cleaner. The birds return. A child's voice echoes down the alley and it sounds like a miracle. Survivors emerge from behind closed doors like people waking from a bad dream. Some are gaunt, others hollow-eyed. A few seem unchanged, but you know better. Everyone carries something now. You and Wolfhild bake bread and offer it to anyone who knocks. No charge, just warmth, just presence. You organize a small gathering in the chapel. Not a mass, there's no priest, but a remembrance. People speak names aloud, share stories, light candles. Some weep, others remain silent. One man brings a fiddle and plays a tune his mother used to hum while kneading dough. It is not joyful, but it is beautiful. In the months that follow, the village rebuilds itself not just in labor, but in spirit. People begin to question the old order. Why did the priests flee? Why did the Lord raise taxes when so many starved? Why did God not spare the good? You do not answer. You just listen and teach and write. You plant a tree near the edge of the chapel, a walnut tree. Beneath it you bury your journal from that year wrapped in cloth, sealed in beeswax. You want someone in the future to find it, to read and know we were here. Oddly, something else begins to bloom: choice. So many have died that land is available, labor is in demand. Laws who once ignored your village now send envoys with offers, coin, tools, contracts. You realize slowly, painfully, that the plague broke more than bodies. It cracked the system. It loosened the old bindings. And now, what grows in the cracks might be something freer. One evening, Fulfil says, "What if we leave? Try somewhere new." You shake your head. "I want to stay." I want to see what this becomes. She nods then adds, I want to plant more trees. So you do, not just for the dead, but for what might yet live. And in that planting, that mourning, that soft and stubborn rebuilding, you find the shape of hope. When you wake, the air smells cleaner, fresher, somehow like the village itself has been washed and wrung out after the long nightmare of the plague. It's the kind of crisp morning that makes you breathe deeper, not because you're well rested, you're not, but because breathing doesn't feel like a borrowed luxury anymore. The world is quieter, yes, but not with the heavy hush of death. This quiet is gentler. It hums with the soft shuffle of beginning again. You step outside and notice how empty the paths are. The fields, the roads, the benches by the chapel, all touched by absence. A third of the village is gone. Their doors stand open, their fires cold. There are ghosts in every alley and memory in every patch of overgrown herb. But the people who remain carry themselves differently. Not bowed by sorrow exactly, though there's still plenty of that, but with a strange new weight, like they've all aged a little faster, shed their old skins, and grown into something sterner, leaner, more alive. Even Gerald the ox seems to walk with purpose, as if he now understands the fragility of the world he hauls across. You find Wolfhild kneading dough at the hearth. She doesn't speak. You don't ask her to. It's enough that she's here alive, that the kitchen smells of flour and rosemary again, that someone remembered to feed the sourdough starter and wipe the soot off the window. These small acts feel like defiance, like planting flags in a world that almost forgot how to grow. With so many people gone, there's more Spaceland Tools home's silence. And oddly enough, there's more freedom too. The rigid order of the manor, the way people used to accept their roles without question, has started to crack. The steward no longer snarls when someone takes an extra bundle of firewood. The reeve starts paying labourers in coin instead of vague promises and yesterday's bread. You notice it when the thatcher declares himself a master roofer and begins training 2 boys in exchange for eggs. When the widow 3 doors down turns her front room into a tiny alehouse and no one asks permission. When the village elders stop scolding you for baking bread your own way and instead ask if they can buy a loaf. Historians call this shift the beginning of a new age, the rise of a middle class, the decline of feudal obligation, the early tremors of something that will one day be called capitalism. But you don't know those words. You only know what you feel possibility. You start walking farther, exploring past the old fences and hedgerows. One day, you reach a town larger than you remembered, bustling in its own strange way. New shops are open. The market square is alive with travelers and traders. Some speak languages you don't understand. One sells glass beads. Another sells herbs that smell like dreams. A woman from somewhere warm offers you a tiny cake shaped like a bird. It tastes of honey and oranges and distant places you've never seen. You trade a basket of Wolfhild's bread for a wool scarf dyed with indigo. It's the brightest thing you've ever owned. The town has changed too. A guild of weavers posts rules for fair prices. Bakers compete with flyers nailed to poles. A young man stands on a crate reading a passage from scripture in English, not Latin. So all may know the truth, he shouts. You watch people gather, listen, nod. Even the church, that towering institution of tradition and control, is bending. The new priest in your village, barely older than you, with parchment ink-stained hands, hosts gatherings to read and discuss. Not just sermons, but books, ideas. He lends out a hand-copied gospel and asks, what do you think this means? Not what should you believe, but what do you think you watch? Wolfhild read by firelight, her brow furrowed, her lips moving silently as she wrestles with the text. You've never seen her so quiet or so fierce. Odd historical fact. It was around this time that literacy began to rise outside the clergy. Slowly, haltingly, but enough to change the world. Some say the printing press would never have mattered without this hunger first. You begin to dream again, not idle, childish dreams of castles or heroics, but grounded, slow-growing ones. You picture a stall in the town market where you and Wolfhild sell your bread herbs, maybe even the spiced cakes she makes in secret. You imagine teaching a few children how to read, how to hold a quill, how to draw maps of places they've never seen but hope to walk through one day. You even imagine writing something of your own. A tale, perhaps, a memory, a small record that says we lived. There is pain still. You walk past the weaver's empty cottage and feel a tightness in your throat. The old bell ringer's house has ivy crawling through the windows. The silence in the chapel isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it echoes too much. Sometimes it stings. But there is joy too. The baker's youngest laughs like thunder when she drops a pie on her foot. A goat gives birth to twins in the barn, and you name them Hope and Definitely Hope. Wolfhild pretends to disapprove, but she smiles when she thinks you're not looking. One night you sit outside with her watching the stars. The fire crackles low. Crickets chirp like they've been given tiny fiddles. She leans against your shoulder and says, "Do you remember when we thought we wouldn't make it?" You nod. I think about it every day. And yet here we are. Here you are. With calloused hands, sore knees, and a future that doesn't feel borrowed anymore. You don't pretend everything is fine. You're not a fool. But you've seen what people can survive. You've seen what they can rebuild. And that knowledge, the quiet strength of it, lives in you now. You fall asleep, with your head resting on Wolfhild's lap, the sound of her heartbeat keeping time with the stars. Tomorrow you'll rise early. Bake, mend a roof, teach a child how to write his name. It's not a grand destiny, but it's a good life. And it's yours. Autumn creeps in slowly like an old friend arriving unannounced, but welcome all the same. The air shifts first cooler, drier, edged with wood smoke and the memory of frost. Then the light changes. It's still golden, still kind, but it arrives late and leaves early like it's grown tired of staying up all night. Leaves begin to fall. Not all at once, not yet, but enough to gather in the corners of paths, to crunch beneath your boots, to remind you that time has moved again. You and Wolfhild begin to prepare. The garden is stripped of its last tomatoes and root vegetables. Onions are braided and hung garlic tucked beneath the eaves, squash wrapped in cloth, and stacked like sleepy suns. You patch the roof again more carefully this time. You've learned which corners let the wind through. Gerald gets a thicker blanket and a lecture on staying out of the well. And then one morning a messenger arrives. He's young, barely more than a boy riding a pale horse with a leather satchel full of rolled parchment. His tunic bears the crest of the king, though slightly crooked like he pinned it on in a hurry. He reads aloud, voice cracking only once all villagers are summoned to witness a new law posted at the edge of the market. You follow the others to the notice board. It's nailed there in careful, curling script. You can't read it yourself, not quite, but Wolfhild reads it out loud to a growing crowd. It says, "The king, this new one, who you've only heard about in songs and speculation, has declared that no man shall be bound to his land without fair wage, that workers may seek better work, may move, may choose, that landowners may not imprison nor press into service without consent." There is silence after she finishes, and then softly an old man says, "Well, I'll be." It's not quite freedom, not yet, but it's something close, a recognition, a tilt in the old balance. People talk of it in whispers first, then louder. A few young men leave that same week, walking toward towns where they've heard the wages are better. 2 girls go with them, one with a pack of embroidery, the other with a pair of shoes she swears can last 100 miles. You hug them both. Tell them to write, though no one expects they actually will. You begin to wonder, too, if there's something else waiting beyond the woods, beyond the hills, beyond the curve of the sky. Not out of discontent, but curiosity. Not because you lack something, but because now, for the first time, you can choose. And yet you stay. Because there is still work to be done here. Still bread to bake, walls to mend, stories to tell. Because this village, scarred and stitched and weathered though it is yours now. It's here, in the cool hush of autumn, that you begin to teach. Not just one child, not just in passing, but a handful of them gathered in the room beside the chapel. You teach them letters, numbers, the rhythm of poetry, and the roots of herbs. Wolfhill teaches them how to stretch dough without tearing it, how to spot good yeast from bad, how to knead by feel rather than force. And they teach you too. They teach you how to laugh again without guilt, how to play games with no stakes, to sing without embarrassment, to look forward to things without flinching. You begin keeping a journal, scraps of parchment sewn together, filled with crooked lines and misspelled words. You write down what the children say, what the birds do in winter, how Wolfhill hums differently depending on the weather. You draw too poorly at first, trees that look like forks, cats that resemble angry turnips. But it improves. One child finds your journal and adds a drawing of you, a stick figure holding a loaf of bread larger than its body. You keep that page in the front. Weird fact, by the late 1300s, literacy among peasants had begun to rise rapidly, especially in towns. Monasteries started producing simpler texts, prayers, herbal guides, even early medical pamphlets written in the local language. Not Latin, not for nobles, for you. Historians still debate how much the peasantry actually read, and whether their ideas ever made it into the books. But you know, this knowledge once locked in cathedrals is beginning to trickle down the thatched roofs, and you're part of that. One evening, a traveller passes through. He's a printer's apprentice from the city, carrying a woodblock with half a psalm on it, carved carefully by candlelight. He shows it to the children, and lets them ink it with blackberries and press it against cloth. One day, he says, words will fly farther than birds. You believe him. You send him off with a bag of rolls and a copy of your journal's first page, just in case it makes someone smile beyond the hills. As the days shorten, your little school becomes something more. People come not just to learn, but to sit, to talk, to remember that they are not just survivors, but thinkers, dreamers, builders. And sometimes, when no one is looking, you imagine the world as a book. A great sprawling tale still being written, each page fragile but beautiful. You imagine this village as a paragraph small but vital, and you finally as a sentence that matters. Winter doesn't crash down from the heavens like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly like water into wood until one morning you wake and the world has changed. The air tastes of iron. The wind carries a sharper edge. The ground, once soft and forgiving, now holds your footprints longer than your memory can keep track. The first frost comes like a whispered warning, dressing every branch and rooftop in delicate lacework that disappears by mid-morning. You find yourself watching the horizon more often, searching for the distant grey veil that always follows. Inside the village, life slows to a hush. The usual noise of daily bustle, cartwheels on dirt, children chasing chickens, Wolfhill shouting at Gerald to stop chewing the laundry, grows quieter, softer, as if even sound is conserving energy. And yet, under this softness, there is preparation. Everyone knows what winter asks of them. Everyone answers in their own way. You and Wolfhill set to work preserving what's left of autumn's bounty. There are dried apples strung like necklaces across the rafters, beans shelled and packed into clay jars, cabbage pickled, honey sealed in wax. Wolfhill adds cloves and rosemary to some of the jars, and the whole hut smells like memory sweet-spiced warm. You've never felt so ready or so aware of how fragile that readiness can be. You seal the windows with cloth, patch the thatch above your bed. Move the goat into the barn and pretend it was your idea before the snow began. Wolfhild pretends she believes you. When the first true snowfall comes, it arrives overnight and without mercy. You open the door and find the world erased. The paths are gone. The trees are sleeping. The sky is the same color as the ground. Even the chapel bell seems muffled, its voice caught in cotton. But inside there is life. You rise early each day to stoke the fire. You've grown good at coaxing embers into flame, better than you were at making friends when you first arrived. Wolfhild says it's because you talk to the logs. You tell her it's because the fire respects fear, and you've given it plenty. Meals are smaller now, simpler. Root vegetables boiled with salt and dried herbs. Thick bread with a smear of last summer's butter. Sometimes a slice of smoked fish from the last fair. But every bite carries warmth. In the evenings, the two of you sit by the hearth. No talking, just the rhythm of shared space. Her knitting, your carving. The occasional spark leaping from the logs like a firefly. You watch the way the light plays in her eyes and wonder how you ever thought winter was only about loss. On market days, fewer now and quieter, you trade preserved goods for essentials, candles, soap, a new kettle after the old one cracked. News travels with the merchants, the plague is retreating, some say. Others speak of rebellion stirring in larger towns, of peasants demanding coin instead of service. A bold thing. A dangerous thing. But no one here laughs it off, not anymore. Odd fact. After the Black Death, labor shortages allowed peasants to negotiate wages and leave their manors for better work. It was one of the rare historical moments when the balance of power tipped, however briefly, toward the people at the bottom. Historians still debate whether this was the start of capitalism or just a temporary flicker of opportunity. But here in your village, it feels like a door has cracked open. You notice it in small ways. A girl offers her weaving, not just in trade, but at a fixed price she names herself. A young man writes letters for neighbors in exchange for firewood. No one sneers. Some nod approvingly. The old order has thinned like the leaves, and what grows in its place is raw but real. Wolfhild, ever restless, even in snow, begins teaching the children how to make herb tinctures. She gives each child a small linen pouch filled with dried leaves and roots. For dreams, she says. For courage. One child sleeps better. Another stops crying when the wind howls. A third gives his pouch to his goat just in case. You begin keeping a second journal, not for thoughts but for stories, tales the children tell. Recipes your neighbor swears will cure colds. The first time you saw snow catch in Wolfhild's hair and thought it made her look like something between a witch and a saint. You read from the journal on the longest night of the year. Everyone crowds into the chapel, wrapped in cloaks, clutching candles, children asleep on laps. The fire crackles. You read slowly, gently, your voice, the only thing moving in the room besides breath. You end with this line: we endured, and so we deserve to dream. No one claps, but someone sobs, and that feels like the truest applause. Later that night, you and Wolfhild step outside. The snow glows under the full moon. The sky is so clear, you feel like you could count every star and still not reach the end of the story they're telling. She slips her hand into yours and whispers, "I've never liked winter." You nod. But maybe it's not always about waiting for spring. Maybe it's about listening to what silence says. You squeeze her hand. And what does it say tonight? That we made it. That we'll make it again. You stand there for a long while, two specks in the snow, warmed not just by cloaks and firelight, but by the knowledge that survival is not just endurance. It is adaptation, reimagining, rebuilding. Winter remains, cold and vast and relentless, but so do you. The thaw begins not with grandeur, but with sound. A drip. Then another. then a slow, steady rhythm of melting like the land itself is exhaling after months of holding its breath. The snow doesn't vanish all at once. It recedes, shrinks back from doorsteps and fences, reveals the bones of the world softened by time. Tiny streams form in ruts along the paths. Icicles snap and fall with surprising violence. Mud rises from beneath the snow like some ancient creature stretching after a long nap. It coats everything. Boots skirts the cat. Wolfild curses more than usual. But you smile because it's the first time in weeks you've heard her complain. The fields dormant and sullen for so long begin to stir. You spot the green stubble of garlic pushing through the frost. The buds on the elder tree near the chapel swell like secrets about to be spoken. Birds return first, a few sparrows, then a quarrelsome pair of crows who argue like an old married couple on your roof. Spring is still a rumor, but the signs are there. In the village, people start moving again with purpose. Cloaks are loosened, windows cracked open, tools clean, sharp and mended. You help fix a fence, then another. Your hands blister more easily after winter's stillness, but the ache is welcome, a reminder that you're still here. The children return to your little classroom jittery and sun-starved. You teach them how to press flowers between parchment, how to sketch leaves, how to write their names in curling letters that look like vines. One boy signs his name as King of Worms. You allow it. Wolfild restarts the herb garden with a ferocity usually reserved for religious zealots. She kneels in the soil, whispering to the seeds like they're old friends. Maybe they are. You find her weeping over a patch of lavender she thought wouldn't return. She pretends it's the wind. You pretend to believe her. Together, you attend the spring fair in the neighboring town. It's the first time you've left the village in months. The road is muddy and full of ruts, but the trees are starting to bloom. Blossoms fall like blessings. The fair is loud, alive, full of scents and colours you'd almost forgotten. Candied nuts, roasted meat, bright ribbons. A man plays a fiddle while standing on one leg. A woman sells ink made from beetles. You trade a dozen loaves of bread for 2 small books, one of riddles, one of stars. You see faces from other villages. Fewer than before, but everyone carries a flicker of recognition. They nod, some even smile. There's a quiet kinship in survival. One stall sells broadsheets printed with local news, something new. You buy one and squint at the words. It speaks of a rebellion in a southern city, of lords arguing over taxes, of a peasant who filed a complaint in writing against his master and won. Historians still debate whether these small uprisings led directly to political reform, or if they were simply the growing pains of a world cracking open. You read every word like it's treasure. Wolfild reads it twice, then uses it to wrap a wedge of cheese. You consider it a fitting metaphor. On the way home, she asks what you'd write if you had your own broadsheet. You say that we lived through a fire and found seeds in the ash. She doesn't laugh. She just nods. As spring unfurls, new life sprouts in places you didn't expect. A widow takes in 2 orphans and teaches them to sew. The old tanner thought long dead limps into town and claims he was simply on a very long walk. A travelling singer stops by the chapel and leaves behind a melody the children won't stop humming. You add verses to the song. It becomes a ritual, each family offering a new line. Some are silly, some are sad, some don't rhyme at all. But by Beltane, the village sings the whole thing together, by firelight. You call it the Song of Staying. Weird fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, communal songs, especially seasonal ones, became ways for people to process trauma, commemorate the lost, and express hope. Not quite hymns, not quite folk tales, something in between. You think that's what you're doing here. Making space for something between. One night you take the children stargazing. You spread blankets on the hill behind the chapel. You point out constellations, Orion, the bear, the dragon, and make up names for others. One child names a cluster Wolfhild's Wrath. She pretends not to be flattered. They ask questions, big ones. Why do stars move? Why do people get sick? Why do we come back? You try to answer honestly. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you say, because the story isn't done. You teach them how to listen to the birds, to the wind, to one another. You tell them that knowledge isn't just in books. It's in bread and seed, in fire and silence, in holding someone's hand without asking why. That's when you realize you're not just teaching them. You're passing on a world, not the one that came before, the one you've made, the one still forming beneath their feet. And in that moment, lying beneath the stars, with children giggling over sky pigs and sun snakes, you feel something that has no name. Peace, maybe, or legacy, or spring. Summer doesn't knock it, barrels in. Where spring crept cautious and patient, summer leaps with both feet into your lap. The sun stretches longer each day, baking the roofs until they steam at dawn, bleaching linens on the line into blinding banners of domestic conquest. Chickens strut like they've inherited the earth. Gerald the ox lies in the shade with a smugness only heat can bestow. Everything is louder now. The birds, the market, the arguments between neighbors about whose goat got into whose garden. Even the silence seems swollen, buzzing with flies and the hum of growth. The trees groan under the weight of leaves. The fields swell with promise. Your days fill quickly. The bakery is busier than it's been in years. Everyone wants bread crusted, chewy, honeyed, salted. You rise before the sun arms, coated in flower hair tucked back, and work beside Wolfield in an easy rhythm. She swats your elbow if you daydream too long. You swat her back with a rag. It's the language you've developed, flower fire, teasing, love but unspoken. One morning a boy runs into the square shouting, a letter is written on thick parchment sealed with red wax, addressed to the village, from the King's Council, an invitation. A representative from every township, every hamlet, every whisper of a village is asked to send someone, to speak, to listen, to witness a new council forming a gathering not of lords alone, but of voices, labourers, craftsmen, healers, bakers. It's voluntary, they say, but they urge you to come. It's unprecedented, absurd, possibly a trap. But the village gathers anyway, and when asked who should go, all eyes turn to you. You stammer, protest, suggest the carpenter or the priest or Wolfield herself. She crosses her arms. You've told more stories than all of us. Go tell this one. You leave at dawn with a satchel of bread, a hand-drawn map, and Wolfield's scarf tucked into your collar. The journey is long days on foot through meadows that smell like thunder, through villages, with faces that mirror your own sunburnt, skeptical, curious. You stay in barns under stars, once in a haycart beside a sleeping goat. You read your journal aloud to strangers at night, and they add their own memories like beads on a string. The city is bigger than you imagined. Buildings like cliffs, streets full of people who've never known your village but say the same things. We survived. We rebuilt. We remember. The gathering takes place in a hall that smells of wax and wood polish. No throne, no soldiers, just benches and voices. A woman from the east speaks of rebuilding her school. A man from the north weeps as he describes losing 5 children, but planting 7 trees in their honor. You speak, too, of Wolfhild, of Gerald, of a schoolhouse that began with a stick in the dirt and became a room full of questions. You speak of the song of staying, of how grief and growth hold hands. You say we used to wait for history to happen to us. Now we shape it. They write that down. Historians still debate whether this first gathering actually influenced law or whether it was symbolic, a gesture. But you were there. You felt the heat. You heard the breath catch when a mason from the coast said I was a serf. Now I own my hammer. You saw the nods, the stillness, the way hope began to root. You stay for a week, help draft a petition, sleep in a convent beside a novice who snores like a trumpet. Then you walk home. When you arrive, Wulfhild is in the garden, hands in the dirt, humming. She stands, brushes her hands, and says nothing. You hold up a jar of imported cinnamon. She raises an eyebrow. You grin. For the next pie. She smirks. You better not burn it. Back in the village, everything is the same, and not. A boy you once taught is now teaching others. A girl you helped after her parents died now manages the market stalls. The goat is still breaking fences. The chapel bell still rings. But there's something else. A sense of forward motion, of breath held and released, of generations looking not back but ahead. You and Wulfhild sit on your bench one evening, watching the fireflies blink like tiny signals in the tall grass. She asks, "What did it feel like?" You say, "Like listening to the future." She leans her head on your shoulder. And what did it say that it remembers us? That night, you write your last journal entry. If anyone reads this, know that we lived. We fell and got up. We bled and laughed and kept going. We weren't perfect, but we tried to build something gentler. You place it beside the spoon carved for the orphaned boy now grown and the bead necklace from the spring fair. You light a candle, let the smoke curl. The village sleeps. The stars blink above. You dream not of before, but of what might come after. And you are at peace. And now, as the final page closes and the last ember in the hearth sighs into darkness, we come to rest. You've walked through plague and winter, through fire and song, through silence and the stirrings of change. You began with little more than a frightened breath in a world you didn't expect to survive. And yet, step by quiet step, you did more than endure. You built, you healed, you taught, you stayed. What began as a strange awakening in a forgotten village unfolded into a gentle epic of laughter beneath frost-bitten trees, of bread passed between calloused hands, of words scrawled in the margins of history by people who were never supposed to write anything at all. You saw sorrow, deep, bone-heavy sorrow. But you also saw the way a single loaf of warm bread could hold back the dark for one more night. How a child's misspelled story could carry more hope than a cathedral. How survival, once so desperate, became something softer, a choice, a promise. And through it all, through goats and garden rows, songs sung by firelight winters long and unforgiving, and stars blinking patiently above you, remembered something many forget. That history is not made by kings. It is made by hands that need, by voices that teach, by hearts that stay. So now, as you lie back in the quiet of your own evening, wherever and whenever you are, I hope the story leaves you softer, sleepier, warmer, a little more human. Because maybe, just maybe, the story you live tonight was never about the past. It was about the quiet bravery of becoming. Good night.